Video games are a lot of things, from just simple entertainment, a good time with friends, an environment to display mechanical prowess, or a vessel for storytelling. But more often than not, people just chalk up games to just being games, whether that be a good thing or a bad thing. With the releases of large titles, I've been spending countless hours grinding through, such as single-player gems like Persona 3 Reload, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and playing Helldivers 2 with friends. I've been quite busy scheduling my downtime to fit all these things I want to play and experience. Over the past few weeks, I found myself on the edge of almost being burnt out by the amount of hours I just sit there looking at a screen while inputting buttons on my controller. But while taking a break one afternoon looking through the Steam storefront as any typical sane person would obviously do in their free time, I saw a particular game come up on my recommended that caught my eye. It had an unconventional name, even more unconventional graphics, and frankly looked like some stuff that would be really popular on those channels that cover indie horror titles. On a whim and out of sheer boredom, I decided to give it a shot. And what a shot that was. But before I begin my standard incoherent ramblings, I'd like to offer a sort of thought exercise. As I mentioned in the introduction, people usually chalk games up to just being games. That might be interpreted as diminishing the validity of the medium with the connotations of what a stereotypical game might be, or be interpreted as a new and creative way any developer can express their ideas and thoughts through a more interactive medium than, say, a book, a video, or a film. But every now and then a game comes out that sort of makes me question what a game really is. Some examples of these experiences are software that could be disguised as a game to subvert expectations, or it's only a game by technicality. Milk inside a bag of milk inside a bag of milk, and milk outside a bag of milk outside a bag of milk are two of those such games. I'm not going to sit around and try to convince you that these are not games, as they most definitely are, but the way you interact with the world in these two games are some of the most creative I've seen in a while. Side note, while doing some research on this game after playing it, I came across this amazing Steam guide that explains the game really well and in a lot of detail, which I highly recommend checking out. I'll leave a link to it in the description. And also, I'm just going to say it here, I really do recommend checking the game out, so I won't go into any spoilers, but if you truly want to go into the game blind, just stop here and come back later. Alright, let's get into it. The story, if it actually really counts as a story, I guess, starts off with the main character being sent to the store to buy milk by her mother. And that's it for the first game. The second game starts right after the events of the first game, and you follow the main character while she comes home, sits in her room, thinks for a bit while reminiscing her past, and goes to bed. That's literally it. So, in other words, basically nothing really happens. And the more I think about it, the more I think that's definitely by design. Unlike a conventional video game where you control a character in the universe and in one way or another self-insert into the game, the Milk series of games has you play as nothing, really. More often than not, you're just a bystander in this girl's life, an observer to what she's going through. An important aspect of the story is that the main character has to take certain medication, and only when she takes this medication can we interact with her as the player. However, unlike a normal game where we end up dictating choices, we as the player can only choose to extend thoughts, remind her of things, wake her up, get her into and out of a thought loop, or move on to thinking of different things. In other words, everything the main character is thinking and is going through is something she probably would have thought of herself, regardless of whether we as a player were there or not. We as the player only act as a medium to help her choose and direct her own thoughts that she defined herself, essentially just giving structure to her mind. Now in the games there are actually some other characters, but these mainly just include the main character's mother and father, which are referred to as mom or dad. The game is seen through the main character's lenses, so it actually sheds quite a bit of light on the context of what's going on. Our first encounter with mom is in the end of the first game, where she's depicted to be a creepy, lifeless humanoid face with empty black eyes, which is not exactly the greatest or most flattering depiction of a mother-like character. And it doesn't get much better in the second game, where she's a big, formless creature with the same face and has tentacles for hands. In the first game, her dialogue is short, straight to the point, and almost sterile in a way with the fact that there's nearly no emotion in it. I think there's a lot you can analyze from this, and there's no certainty to what it actually means. After all, we're looking through the eyes of the main character, being a clearly emotionally troubled person who definitely needs some help. But some contextual clues can help with that, courtesy of some analysis I've read online. In the latter section of the first game, the main character talks about how her dad had committed suicide. Obviously, this has affected the main character a lot, and one could say had perpetuated the need for the main character to have to continue taking medication to attempt to control her mental issues. But I think that this piece of context can go some way to explaining the way the mother is depicted. A common theory I've seen is that the mother is emotionally burnt out, having to deal with the stress and grief of losing her significant other as well as taking care of a daughter with severe mental illnesses. The mother probably doesn't show any emotions for her daughter's sake, but the main character doesn't know it. In the main character's eyes, she's just a formless, mysterious creature because she can't read her, feeding into the universal fear of the unknown that probably has multiplied due to the main character's complications. In the second game, Mom is depicted as much more monstrous and scary, accompanied by a soundtrack that I can only describe as being quite fitting for the visuals. In this sequence, I think what we see as the player, or what the main character is interpreting as to what's happening, isn't what's actually happening in reality, especially when the text boxes are shaking. During this time, Mom also inserts some sort of needle into the main character, which the main character implies is something that happens regularly. This also feeds into the theory that Mom only looks like this in the main character's eyes because of the shock and fear the main character associated with her mother. Dad, however, is quite a different story. Personally, I honestly don't really know what's going on with the main character's father. The main character describes her father's corpse in the first game, and in the second game, the main character recounts a traumatic story involving her father picking her up from her last day of school. There's a lot of theories out there, all of them ranging from dark to stuff that nearly traumatized me while reading. So this one's really up to you to find out, because I'm pretty sure just me reading out one of these would be against TOS, so I'll just leave it at that. Now for the star of the game, the main character. I am definitely on the side of that the game definitely does not want you to be diagnosing the girl or understanding her through her symptoms, and I don't really think that the game's target audience is supposed to have special knowledge or experience in these fields either. So, in my opinion, the right way to go about it is to understand her from a very basic level. She takes her distorted perception of reality as real. She craves friendship and communication because she feels isolated. She feels betrayed by something or somebody. She is both physically and psychologically in pain. She's not fully aware of her condition, and she's also pretty sensitive and compassionate. I think a lot of fans of the game can relate to the character in one way or another. And even if they don't, they can understand and empathize with what is going on. Again, I'd like to emphasize that I don't think the game is trying to target people who have a lot of experience with mental health issues. In fact, I think in more ways than one, it gives people who don't really understand a lens into seeing the struggles many people have to go through. There's definitely a lot to unpack and a lot of symbolism in both games, and frankly, I feel quite a bit underqualified to be saying, oh, this means this, or that symbolizes that. There's the dream sequences, the symbols, the items in the main character's room, and the various stories that the main character recounts. The details in each of the various endings of both games also lend a hand into exploring the main character's psyche and troubles. I'm not going to go into any detail at all about the endings, but just know that some of them are pretty heavy and unnerving. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know what it's like to go through what the main character is going through, and I'm not going to expect many other players to be either. But after playing, I definitely have gained a new perspective on a lot of issues that I previously have never gave a second thought to. So in short, I think that although this might sound a bit general and something you can say about any game that is remotely deep or thought-provoking, I do believe that these games hold a special significance to everyone differently. Although the games might be the same to everyone, the journeys and the takeaways from each and every person might be different. Some people might take a more distant stance with these games, just feeling bad for the main character, while others might take a more personal and intimate stance with these games, empathizing with the main character and understanding what it's like to go through these struggles. And of course, there's going to be people who don't care or think that the depictions are totally inaccurate. But I think that's fine, and in a way, maybe that's what these games are about. Ultimately, the game depicts the horrors of struggling with mental illness, and I truly do appreciate that it does not romanticize that idea either. You, as the player, are just plunged into this almost raw experience, where a girl just goes through things right before your very eyes. And despite this, you as a player come to realize that she's still human, she still has feelings like everyone else, And more often than not, I think a lot of people tend to overlook that when it comes to people who are struggling in the inside rather than on the surface. And as quickly as you get drawn in when the main character takes her pills, you get taken back out again as the effects wear off. As a closing thought and a callback to the thought exercise I proposed earlier in the video, these two games are still undoubtedly games, but also in a way they are far more than just your run-of-the-mill quote-unquote games. In fact, one might not even call them video games at all, but audio-visual interactive experiences. But semantics aside, I think that milk inside a bag of milk inside a bag of milk, and milk outside a bag of milk outside a bag of milk are truly one-of-a-kind experiences that you will not find anywhere else.